Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for a couple more minutes while people join in. We'll start the presentation around 12:02. We're just waiting for people to join in. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We have a couple, maybe one more minute before we start the program. Just one more minute and we'll start the program. I think we're almost ready. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today to do this program, Akamai, A Connected Workplace. You'll be hearing from Brian and Victor shortly, but before we launch into the program, we have some administrative things to get accomplished today. So next slide. Please make sure to join us in these upcoming events. They are published every Monday in our newsletter, and they're also online. So you can see there's 4 great programs coming up. Please take note. Next slide. Share our conversations. We're all about community and networking. If you have something to be celebrated or a new job hire or projects, anything that you want us to share with our community, please connect with Steve Smith. As you can see, his email address on the bottom of the screen. We'd love to hear from you. Make sure to check us out on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. Next slide. And more importantly, thank you so much to our valued partners. Without them, we wouldn't be able to provide you with this valuable content today. Here are our corporate sponsors. Our next slide will be our platinum sponsors. Thank you again. And the slide after that are our actual gold and silver sponsors. Next slide. And today we are going to be taking Q&A with Brian and Victor at the end of the presentation. We're leaving enough time. Please use your Zoom chat box. We'll be reading them throughout and addressing all questions at the end of the presentation. For right now, I want to thank everyone, and I'm going to pass my virtual mic to Kathy Hunt to introduce everybody. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kathy. I am co-chair of the Programs Committee with CoreNet New England, and we are excited to share with you all this virtual discussion and tour of Akamai's new global headquarters in Kendall Square. The 19 uniquely custom floors opened exactly a year ago. We think you'll find the story behind this project, its real estate decisions, and employee engagement process inspiring, not to mention visually stunning. And now I'll introduce our speakers, Brian Murray and Victor Vizgaitis. Brian Murray is Senior Director of Global Real Estate and Workplace for Akamai Technologies. During his 18 years, he has directed real estate, facilities operations, and construction throughout America, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. He has over 30 years industry experience assisting companies with their workplace strategies. Victor Vizgaitis of Sasaki is principal there, where he has practiced for 17 years and leads the commercial architecture and workplace teams. We have the Q&A tab at the end, and we have a chat box, and I encourage you to use the Q&A tab specifically. And take it away, Victor and Brian.
Thank you, Kathy. Hello, everyone. As Kathy mentioned, I'm Brian Murray, Senior Director of Global Real Estate and Workplace at Akamai Technologies. And thank you for joining us for our tour of our new global headquarters building in Cambridge.
And hi, everyone. Victor Vizgaitis from Sasaki. Kathy, thanks for the introduction. Really looking forward to leading you on this virtual tour. Wish we could all be there in person, but hopefully this will be the next best thing. So Brian, why don't you kick it off?
Sure, Victor. Thank you. Planning, designing, and building 145 Broadway was quite an undertaking. There were many, many talented people involved, both internally and externally, including Sasaki, Officeworks, Technion, North Star, and others. But I want to briefly acknowledge a couple of former Akamai colleagues whose impact on the project will never be forgotten. First, Erica Chapman, who many of you know left Akamai to join Pepsi before the new headquarters opened. And second, Marissa Wool Silva, the former director of workplace experience at Akamai. Their incredible contributions to the project do live on, so thank you, Erica and Marissa. Now let's talk about the project. Why this project? Next slide, Victor, please. Why did we do it? Well, the number one reason was the opportunity to consolidate. At the time the planning began, we had 6 different offices in Kendall Square, as shown on this diagram, and close to 2,000 employees in Kendall Square. When we signed the lease with Boston Properties, it was actually for both the new building at 145 Broadway and a lease renewal at 150 Broadway. So the initial plan was to consolidate into 2 buildings. Fortunately for Akamai, long before we occupied 145 Broadway, our real estate team saw the writing on the wall on the future of work, and we decided to sublease 150 Broadway while the market was still good. Next slide, please. So some of our key goals on the project were to conquer the focus collaboration divide. We have about 1,000 software engineers in Cambridge, and focus space is quite important to them. We also wanted to increase employee retainage and help recruiting by enhancing the overall workplace experience, including amenities. After all, it's a very competitive job market for tech companies in Cambridge. We also wanted the new building to reflect our company culture and to be a great space for the customer experience. And one of the key ways we made this all happen was to hire Sasaki. So with that, I'll turn it over to Victor.
Thanks, Brian. Very, very kind. Through all of those goals that Akamai kind of came to the project with, looking at this as a major real estate decision, but also from the perception of the employee experience, the customer experience, through all of those initial conversations, we really drilled down into this one statement. Akamai is an internet content delivery provider, right? Something like, Brian, I know I'm going to get the stat wrong, but something like 1/3 of the world's internet traffic is running through Akamai's systems at some point. It's pretty amazing what they do, but really to try to get down to how they were going to do that came down to the same thing, right? And so to connect the world, we must first connect to each other. That was the core underpinning to try to solve all these challenges. And one of the interesting big concerns that came up right at the beginning of the project was, okay, at that point, we're distributed across 6 different sites in Kendall Square, not to mention across the globe. We're going to move into this new 19-story tower. And that's very exciting, but in some ways, it's also a bit terrifying. Are we going to go into a place that we feel just as disconnected as we do at that point, or as they did at that point, because we are going to be so vertically distributed? How are we going to make sure that the people on the 17th floor bump into and talk to and connect with the people on the 3rd floor, and that people are moving and feeling like ultimately one Akamai? So that was really the big, I think, design and real estate challenge of the new space. How are we going to think about this not as a series of stacked floors of pancakes, if you will, but create something that is truly a singular experience? And as we walk through this, I'll keep referencing it, and Brian will keep referencing it. It was really the creation of what came to be called the Akamai, a path that contains basically all of the social and collaborative space in the building, spread across all 19 floors, where a person can walk from floor 1 to floor 19, or maybe more easily from floor 19 down to floor 1, without ever actually having to get in the elevator and really get a sense of what is going on across the entire company. So you have essentially, it functions as one 450,000 square foot floor is really the idea. And to expand that, not just from what's happening in the building and how is the building itself connected, but to think about Akamai as a much broader global operation, because that is who they are. Brian, I don't know how many offices globally you have now. Do you know that number off the top of your head?
I believe we have 60 at the moment.
Yeah, okay, and well over, I think, 7,000 staff. To think of this as the headquarters for the global company, that this has to serve everybody and be emblematic of that connection out to all of these different locations, and really symbolizing what they do. So we're going to talk about the project and walk through the building, not so much as a series of floors, so we'll reference some of those, but as a series of ideas about what the project had to accomplish to hit all those goals that Brian was talking about at the beginning. So what you see here is obviously both a photograph of the building on the left, and then essentially a stacking diagram of all those 19 floors where you can see the Akamai in that kind of rainbow color. And then a series of these themes that we're going to touch on real quick. I do think it's important to understand from that photograph there that what you're seeing in that color obviously matches up with the diagram on the right. This is very intentional that the Akamai, the path that connects all 19 floors, and I should say the reason it's called the Akamai is because it is literally a mile long. It's something within, I can't remember, I want to say 100 linear feet of a mile. But that is really meant to be called out and to be seen and to be recognized, both while you're inside and outside of the building, emblematic of this idea of connection. So we're going to start here at the ground, and I think touch first on this idea of Akamai as brand. For those of you who may have driven past the old Akamai building at 150 Broadway, it was there. There was a sign on the building. If you sort of peered closely through the windows on the ground floor, you could get a peek into their network operations center. But for being what I think at the time was the third largest employer in Kendall Square, which is no small feat given the companies that are there, Akamai, I think, was relatively hidden and in some ways unknown. And so the goal here was to bring a high level of visibility to that street experience, to that front door experience, and to really begin to show off in an artistic way that Akamai was here, that this is a major company doing some really significant and really exciting things. And so that's everything from just getting more formal branding in the lobby to this network of lines that you see and that you will see as we go through the project, which really goes back to tying back to locations of other offices globally, to the installation of this interactive, I'll call it a chandelier, this light sculpture in that front door lobby area that extends up the stairs, that ties into the global map that is on the ceiling, that helps to display how internet traffic is flowing around the world. And it's tied directly then into Akamai's Network Operations Center, which sits on the second floor, which is this space, which is pretty awe-inspiring when you walk in here. It is right at the top of that main stair. And the goal here is to show it off. Brian, I think it's important that you jump in here and talk. I think in a lot of companies, this kind of setup would actually be kind of secret and kind of hidden, right? There's a lot of data going through here, but you guys made a really conscious decision that this was something that had to be showed off. Why was that?
We did. The Network Operation Command Center, more commonly called the NOC, is thought of as the heart of Akamai. So we located it in the most visible location possible at the top of the grand staircase on the second floor. And the floor-to-ceiling glass walls at this location make it highly visible for employees and, of course, for customers who come to visit. It's also visible to the public as you walk or drive down Broadway. So this is one of 3 command centers in the building where we track internet traffic on Akamai's network, along with internet security attacks. And, we sort of put the title up here, Visualizing Surface, because I think as you go from this idea of presenting brand, as much as a color or as a logo is brand to Akamai, I think this space is brand to Akamai. Over and over and over again, we heard that the Network Operations Command Center, the NOC,
was really in a lot of ways the heart of Akamai. Not that a lot of employees were coming and going in and out of here every day, but that it was symbolic of what Akamai does. And so the ability to show that off to employees, to customers, even to passersby in the street, because you can see it from Broadway up on the second floor here, was a way of telling the story very clearly. And again, presenting the brand for what they do. That space then is tied directly and immediately into the executive briefing center space on the second floor. So that entire second floor, once you get up to the top of that grand stair, as Brian said, is all about helping to tell a customer story, helping to sell who Akamai is, and make it really, really clear the value and the importance of what is happening here. And this space is a series of different types of meeting rooms, very flexible spaces, everything from the more formal, almost boardroom-like setup to kind of casual meeting space like you see here in the left of the image. As we go up another level, now up to the third level, again, all of which can just be traversed through stair connections. This is part of the employee experience. That idea that from the lobby, from the front door, I can move up, I can experience the knock, I can come up into this third level, which now has another series of important spaces. In addition to office space, we've got this great cafe that looks out over Broadway and the park, but also where this image started out was what is essentially the tech desk, the help desk. You know, the place where you got a problem with your laptop, you go. So instead of creating something that is hidden behind closed doors in the back or in the basement where a lot of these things happen, trying to create something that is very front and center. This is a place where everybody has to come. Let's use this program to our advantage and make it part of the employee experience. Drop your laptop off, grab a cup of coffee, sit and wait for a little bit, chat with your colleagues before heading to your desk and into work. Because in the end, you know, a big part of the whole idea around creating a connected community for Akamai is around sparking interaction, right? And so that can happen in places around food, places around technology. But as we move across the Akamai vertically in the building, there are a series of these spaces that are, you know, more than your typical pantry with sustenance, coffee and water, that are meant to be a little larger scale, that have a grab and go food and beverage, that allow for people to bump into each other and spend a little additional time connecting with their colleagues. Which then I think gets to this next part of the conversation, which I can't tell you how much discussion this drove through the design and the implementation process. The conversation around the need to collaborate versus the need to focus. As Brian said, you know, there are over 1,000 software engineers on this site alone, making Akamai work, making the systems work. And so much of what they do is tied directly into the need to be able to sit and code and be uninterrupted and not be distracted. And I'm going to come back to that in just a second. At the same time, this is still an office of 2,000 people. The goal of having an office, the point of having an office, and a big part of the point of Akamai consolidating to one site was to bring people together and let them interact, let them connect, and let them collaborate. And so the genesis of the idea around the Akamai was knowing that we were never going to go to a place where everybody was going to have a private office, just not feasible and doesn't support really the idea of collaboration, was to think about the idea of open office a little bit differently. I think a lot of what we've seen over the past couple of years has been a drive to intermix open collaborative space with open office space. You know, the idea that I can pop out of my desk, walk 10 feet, sit down in a lounge space and have a conversation with my colleagues. I think that's one valid way of working and it works for a lot of companies. I think for Akamai, it really didn't make sense. And so there was a conscious effort to actually, while it's occurring on the same floor, separate the collaborative spaces, whether that's open alternative workspaces, pantries and cafes, things like game rooms or other destinations, conference rooms, other types of meeting spaces. Let them be separate spaces. So the Akamai contains all those social venues, while the open office space is really about the desk and about the ability to focus. And so inside the Akamai, we see spaces like this, and they are very much branded through a material palette, through these stripes of lighting, these stripes of color that you see. As we start to get into the office area, it becomes a little bit quieter, a little bit more of a neutral color palette. And we get to an open office environment that, while in some ways I'm gonna say looks maybe a little bit conventional from a workstation standpoint, was actually incredibly considered. And Akamai went through, I'll say, exhaustive efforts with their employee population to understand what this needed to be and make it come to fruition. Brian, can you talk a little bit more, I think, both about what the process was and just how involved with the furniture vendors you all got, and then what the goals here for the employee population were, and even how it's working, or how it worked for a couple of months before we all went home?
Yes, these are roughly 42 square foot Technion workstations, and they were the result of an in-depth engagement process with furniture vendors and employees. This included multiple mock-ups, surveys, focus groups, and RFPs. And we actually have two workstation styles. The one shown here is more open and collaborative as an option, and the other style is the same footprint, but with higher panels to improve focus. And we also allowed our departments to make their own decisions which style was best for them. So we really went overboard in terms of engaging the employees, getting them involved in the design, and ended up with something that at the time, people might look at it and say, well, that's not really forward thinking. People were doing benching in tech companies and such. But this is what our employees wanted. And so we gave it to them. And of course, now in hindsight, after the world we've been living in for the past several months, maybe it was forward thinking, maybe we lucked out. But they're a great workstation. We've had some great feedback for the few months we did work in the space, and we're very happy with the outcome.
I'm going to try to monitor some of the QA as it comes in, just when there are things that are particularly relevant. There's one here. The question is, how did you convince IT to want to be front and center? That a lot of tech companies, really, IT just wants to be hidden. They want to be in their own cave somewhere. And Brian, I think you can talk to this. I do want to mention that IT was really heavily involved through the course of this project, right? I mean, they were right there at the table with the steering committee the whole time. So we were able to bring them along with some of these concepts. And I do think there was a balance here, right? That help desk area is kind of front and center. It doesn't mean that they don't have back of house space. All their build rooms, their storage rooms, and everything is still, somewhat tucked away. So there's a little bit of a hybrid here and a little bit of a mix. But I don't know, Brian, to put you on the spot.
But I think the question is that this was pretty unique, and we were very lucky. We have a tremendous amount of smart building technology in the building. That could be a 2-hour presentation just on the smart building technology. It's fascinating. How did we convince them? We were very lucky. At the time the planning commenced, Akamai had a CIO who was very forward thinking, headquartered in our Silicon Valley office in Santa Clara. And he was, in the heart of all the new cool things happening with tech companies, and was very passionate about it. So it really was a top-down decision, which was wonderful for people like us, because that's not what you normally find. And that's the really simple explanation of how it all happened.
Sometimes luck is critical.
Yeah.
Just to finish up the collaboration versus focus conversation, like Brian and I both said, we made this very conscious decision to almost separate those two types of space, right? They do occur on the same floor. It's easy to move between both of them. But one of the specific design decisions then was to make it really evident in terms of wayfinding and understanding of where I go when I need to be collaborative, when I want to be social. And so again, back to the idea of the Akamai, you saw it in that exterior picture. The Akamai is very intentionally colored and branded and meant to be kind of a stark contrast in the space, that from wherever I am on the floor, I see the outside of the Akamai in this sort of bright rainbow of colors as I move through the building. And it becomes a conscious signal that, great, time for me to go and and be social, time for me to go and work with my teammates, I go to where the color is. That is the thing that then opens the portal into those collaborative spaces. So it's also very much a wayfinding tool. The colors evolve as you go up the building, from Akamai orange on the ground floors to Akamai blue on the top floors, and then sort of the gradient in between. Which also then speaks to, I think, this idea of providing a variety of choice in the building. The desk was obviously a critical discussion point and critical to the success of the project. But given the scale of the project and the desire to drive people to move around, which we'll talk about more in a minute, but to think about the office as more than just their desk, it became very critical to provide a variety of other types of work environments, as well as other types of play environments, from casual lounge spaces to laptop tables to almost library-like spaces, as well as the cafes, those places just to reset for a minute, I think became really, really important. The image that you see here in the bottom right, and I'll talk about this at the end as well, is actually located on the 18th floor of the building along the Broadway street front. It's some of the most prime and valuable real estate in the building. And we have created an alternative work area that is not assigned to anybody, not to an executive, not to a team, not to a particular department. It is there for absolutely everybody to use. Everybody in the company, whether it's the people who work in Cambridge or the people who are visiting globally, has the same opportunity to enjoy and work in some of the most prime real estate in the company. Let's see if I can get this playing here. And as part of creating the Akamai, of trying to allow for those vertical connections to happen, we wanted to ensure that some of these spaces become more significant in scale, grander double height spaces. This happens to be the 4th and 5th floor overlooking the Broadway Park. So very visible from the street and very visible views back to Cambridge and down to Boston. Space that can be used for team meetings, as well as smaller scale, more intimate spaces that are, for a smaller casual conversation. That wall in the background happens to be an art installation that is created out of keyboard keys. I think there's something like 43,000 keys comprising that wall, so something obviously very relevant to Akamai. I talked a little bit there about this idea of movement and that being spread across 19 floors of the building, one of the main goals was to get people to get out of their seats and travel. And so the diagram here on the right is the same, but it's labeled a little bit differently. And the goal here within the Akamai was not just to create alternative work environments, but to create different types of destinations. And so you'll see on the 17th floor, we've called it the Lair. That's one of the game rooms that is more for video games, while on the 8th floor is the Arena, which is another game room more for ping pong, and it's called low-tech games. And you'll see a variety of these things. And the goal is to say, fine, if you want the best coffee in the building, you're gonna have to get out of your seat and you're gonna have to go to that barista staffed cafe on the 3rd floor, right? If you wanna play ping pong, that happens in one location. It's not to make all 19 floors identical, but is really to allow and then connect through these staircases the idea that this is one place and that everybody should have access to everything, that everybody should be really getting up and moving. And I think one of the important things here too to understand is that this ties into a broader wellness and sustainability mission that Akamai had. The building itself, the base building, pursued LEED actively and is LEED Gold, and Akamai did a lot to support that mission. But in the end, Akamai actually made the decision to not pursue LEED for the interiors and instead focused on WELL, really trying to focus more around the health of its employees. Brian, can you talk a little bit more about that decision?
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, the corn shell is LEED Gold, but for the TI work, we decided to pursue WELL building certification from the IWBI, the International Well Building Institute. And as many of you probably know, WELL certification is a tool for advancing health and well-being in buildings with a focus on these 10 items. It's air, water, nourishment, light, movement, thermal comfort, sound, materials, mind, and community. And the good news is we've been waiting and waiting, and we actually expect to hear from the IWBI later this month, hopefully before Thanksgiving. If all goes according to plan, fingers crossed, we will be WELL Platinum certified, which they told me a few months ago, I don't know if it still holds true, that if we hit platinum, we'll be the largest WELL Platinum building east of the Mississippi. So quite an accomplishment if we can hit that. In hindsight, pursuing WELL was one of the best decisions we made, considering all that's going on in the world now.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you guys took this really seriously. I think ultimately we were able to submit for 97 out of 100 points to hit that target, which is a pretty significant accomplishment. But, you know, for those of you who don't know, Brian just went through the list of sort of the topics on WELL. You know, it does cover everything from like how much sugar is the drink that you're serving in the cafeteria to operational needs and cleaning products, as well as conscious real estate decisions around what you're building. But I do think even to go beyond WELL and the idea that Akamai would invest in things as straightforward, I was going to say simple, but that's not accurate. It's as straightforward as inserting these connecting staircases to be symbolic of the idea that we want you to be moving, right? Let's not be confined to the elevators and thinking about how we move through a tower, but really about getting up and getting out of your seat and connecting that way. Brian, there's a question here about speaking to the specific features of WELL that we applied for. And obviously it was almost all of them. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head, but I don't know if there are particular ones that you are really focused on in terms of some of the significant accomplishments decided not to pursue.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there were any specific features. We like when with LEAD, you go through the list and grab for everything you can find. Probably if you don't know a lot about WELL, what you need to understand is it goes so far beyond what we do in our profession. It really has a lot to do with your company's wellness policies. And the reason we're hoping to get such a high rating is because we had some really, really strong, well-established policies for wellness. And throughout the whole planning process, our weekly meetings, the wrap-up meetings we're having right now was a partnership between our department, Global Real Estate and Workplace, and our HR Wellness department. So we worked on this very closely together. And we actually made a decision recently where we're anticipating getting a certification, and we're going to be announcing it to the employees, but it's not going to come from us. It's going to come from the HR Wellness team, because we think that will resonate more with the employees as a strong message about, you know, just communicating how important wellness is to Akamai.
A couple more questions I think probably makes sense to answer here as we're going on. One of them was around assigned seating, right? And Brian, I don't know if you guys are thinking about anything new going forward, but the intent here is actually or at least the vast majority of seating did wind up being assigned on sort of a one-to-one basis. Everybody has a desk. Brian, is there any particular technology that wound up being used around supporting some of the seating policies?
Yeah, we put some technology in for booking, for hoteling. And as Victor said, though, at the 11, we were trying during the planning, like we all do in our profession, to be forward thinking and aggressive, but we ran into some, you know, internal roadblocks for good reasons. And when we opened the building, the majority of the employees did have assigned seats. But we did plan it in a way where we did have a commitment from our leadership that they understood what was happening with mobility and everything we all talk about in the industry. So we weren't allowing a lot of growth space as headcount grew in Cambridge, especially since, as I mentioned at the kickoff, we subleased essentially the expansion space that we originally thought we needed across the street at 150 Broadway. Well, we knew that we would be coming up with policies and implementing a much more aggressive unassigned seating policy. So like everybody now, of course, we're working on that really, really hard. And we don't have the answers yet. Maybe sometime in Q1 at Akamai, we'll have some answers that will turn into projects, but I do expect in the future it will be very different. It's obviously, that's a big issue with all of us, and the same holds true for Akamai.
And I've got one technical question here on the stairs, and it's, are all of the Akamai stairways interior to the space, or do they include fire stairs? And what are the fire protection considerations for the interior stairways? You know, so we inserted, I believe, 11 additional stairs into the project. Obviously, 11 is less than 19 in terms of the numbers of floors. And so, yes, we did try to be creative with integrating actually one of the fire stairs into the Akamai. So there are occasions where you do actually duck into the fire stair. We tried to brand those pieces of the fire stair in terms of coloration and graphics to keep them consistent with the rest of the Akamai. And, you know, this was trying to be smart about using space, trying to be smart about the resources and the money that we were spending, and using the stairs intelligently. In terms of fire protection, you know, stairs, new stairs and projects I can find are often around finding the loopholes in the building code and figuring out how to work within that. You know, as long as you're not immediately connecting more than 2 floors, stairs are not a problem. Floor openings are not a problem. Once you start to go beyond connecting more than 2 floors with a fire separation, you've got to do it without a fire separation. You've got to do a couple of things. You've got to keep that opening of the stair that you're cutting in the floor slab to no more than twice the area of the stair. I won't get into lots of building code details, but there are ways that we can do it. And I think the other thing that allowed this to happen is that none of these are egress stairs, right? They are convenience stairs. We don't have to worry about them being a life safety issue. So this was pretty close work with our code consultants and the building department to make this all work. But in the end, we have a really connected building that I think is functioning the way everybody wanted to.
And I'll add to that, Victor. There were quite a few challenges using the fire stairs, and our landlord and developer, Boston Properties, is, you know, a first-class company. They were very concerned about following the rules and satisfying the city of Cambridge. And so this involved a lot of input from code consultants and others. And even once the building opened, we had some challenges. A brand new building, you know, new buildings are tough, especially with all the technology in buildings these days, running the systems. And to make this really flow as a nice circulation path for employees, when it got to fire stairs, we had designed magnetic hold opens to so people could see it's an opening and you're supposed to continue down the fire stair for a floor. But there were challenges with that because of stair pressurization and issues that came up, and it took a while to overcome it. So it was more difficult to implement than we actually thought, but at the end of the day, no regrets. The end result is great.
Yeah, a little fine tuning at the end. So let me move into another topic here. I mean, obviously it's a topic we've been talking about, but this idea of building culture, right? That was the whole goal of the project in one sense, of creating this place that is one Akamai and can really show off Akamai, because it's not just about the logo on the building or showing off to customers coming to the couple lower floors or even to the person walking by on the street. It's actually very much about building pride of place for the employees, right? And tying into that employee experience. So as we move through the Akamai, you know, there's a lot of conversation about some of the messaging, some of the critical points to the internal Akamai brand, the internal culture, the internal groups, and the things that Akamai does to celebrate who they are and to begin to incorporate them. So I talked about that keyboard wall and just talking about it becoming a map to show off where the global offices are, conversations around this message of one Akamai, or, you know, Danny Lewin, the original founder of the company. There's a big awards program that's really critical, I think, to the culture of the company. That's displayed sort of front and center in that employee experience area right outside the IT center in that cafe, which is what you see there just in the background. But beginning to include all of these throughout the entirety of the project became a way of conveying messaging. And there are multiple ways. One is low tech, and they are implemented fixed graphics. And there are also a series of more high-tech versions. You'll see the monitors included in the Akamai throughout the building as ways of conveying other current events, current messaging, other information that might be going on throughout the course of the day or the week or the year. We tried to also just be really conscious that idea of global connection and bringing a sense of differentiation. The idea that when you are in the workstation areas for doing your heads down focused work, it's a little quiet. The color palette is a little bit more muted right around the desk. There's not a lot of detail and a lot of activity. But when you are in the Akamai, bringing that sense of the color branding and wayfinding into the space, that idea that there is a broader web of global connections that is running through this place as the headquarters, and finding ways to pull that into the detailing of the office, whether it's a reveal in the drywall, an applied laminate to millwork, or an epoxy reveal separating different finishes in the floor, or even the lighting, making sure that this always feels like the same type of system that is moving through all 19 floors of the building. And then the last two topics here, the first one, this idea of inviting play. I touched on the game rooms a little bit, but that it's not just all hardcore serious work that's happening here, right? That we do all need places to pause for a moment, to reset, to take a little bit of a break. So that idea of the game rooms, ping pong is phenomenally important at Akamai, but even things like installing a giant wall that is a Lego wall that people can build on, a little tiny thing that can get more elaborate if they want to. That Akamai logo in the bottom right there is actually all done out of Legos. Someone had high aspirations there. But to allow for these places to become, I think, as important as some of the other collaboration spaces, which then I think leads to the last idea as we get to the top of the building here. What you're seeing are really the 18th and the 19th floors. Again, all along Broadway, what is probably the most 100% valuable, high profile real estate in the building that could easily be given over to the C-suite, to a customer center, to the boardroom, to things like that. There was a very conscious decision by Akamai to not do that, and instead to give it back to the employees to make this the really strong multi-purpose cafeteria space that everybody could take part in. Brian, you want to talk a little bit about that as a key business decision?
Yeah, sure. We, in the beginning, discussed, well, should the executive offices be on the top floor? And then it was discussed, should our customer EBC be on the top floor? We even had a design consultant helping us with design features of the EBC, and she was shocked that we wouldn't be putting the customer experience on the top floor of the building. But what we really wanted was to create a space for everyone to use. So what you're seeing here is our cafeteria, the cafeteria seating area. We just went up the stadium seating stairs into additional seating, which is on the top floor. This is the 19th floor. The views are spectacular. It's an extremely popular location. You can go up there, any time of day. It doesn't have to be at lunchtime. And it's an extremely busy location. People just like to hang out there and work or have a casual meeting. You can see the views are just spectacular. What a few of you may know, some of you may know, is there's a lot more development happening in Kendall Square. Some of it's pretty far along in the planning. So there will be buildings that will be as tall or taller than 145 Broadway that will block some of these views, which is personally disappointing, but nothing we didn't know when we decided to move forward with this location. But it still will be a really spectacular view. But our friends at Timco, Volpe, Boston Properties, and others are are working on residential and commercial buildings that you'll see out that view right now. This space was contemplated as an employee space. We have some ideas to actually improve upon what we just built. We're going to work on creating this space up here where we're able to really lock it down and isolate it so we can have outside community groups come in and use the space, or professional groups such as ours. But right now it's primarily used as an in-house spot for different things. Like if we were in the building, we would have just had our November benefits fair up there. We did last November, but whether it's team meetings, parties, functions, or just lunch, that's how the space is used right now. A little side story, we have a beautiful drop-down screen, which would be right in front of this view you see. It comes down, there's a projector that drops down, really a first-class thing. We've shown movies after hours for employees, and so we have lots of good ideas. But guess what? It's now on the punch list as something that needs to be replaced. And to get a 500-pound screen that is so big in and out of the building, we're trying to figure it out for weeks. We'll come up with a solution, but unfortunately, that's one of those little things that you can't think of everything, but it's a bit of a challenge how to get it out and get the new screen in and get it installed.
All right. So that gets us through the 19th floor, the end of the Akamai. I think the end of the virtual tour. Not as good as being there in real life, but hopefully it gives you all a good sense of what the place is like. And we are more than happy to answer questions, which I think the goal is to do them through the Q&A feature on Zoom. And so I can try to keep track of them as they come in, and happy to talk about anything you want. While we're waiting, I think maybe I just want to add, Brian and his team, I think really took this as a once in a lifetime opportunity almost to do something of this magnitude for a company like Akamai, and to try to look beyond the typical, really investigate, what the possibilities were to do something that was going to be a positive contribution to the company and change how they were going to work well into the future. This is not a 5-year lease, right? This is not something that you're going to do again anytime in the near future, Brian. This is meant to be long-term.
It is. It's a 15-year lease. And as you could see from some of the visuals, there's some complicated things going on here from an architectural interior standpoint. And I've been looking at construction drawings for decades. I have a background in architecture. I'm very familiar with CDs. But there are things I just couldn't pick up on doing my typical review. And as the building was being constructed, and we had had so many discussions with Sasaki and thought we knew everything, I'd see little details and I'd say, oh my God, this isn't what I expected. But it was being developed, and I'd pull Victor in, I pulled Erica in the building once we did a walkthrough. We just needed to be comfortable with some of these really, really forward-thinking, creative ideas that Sasaki was incorporating into the design. You might have seen the images of all the diagonals which are represent our network, which is really cool. The employees love that. I think visitors like it. But when we were wrapping up, one of the last things we did were the diagonals that went over the cabinets and the appliances. And I thought, that's just taking it too far. But again, I really got to appreciate through the process what a really strong design team's vision is, and I kept my mouth shut. I didn't complain, and by the time it was all done, it all came together, and the whole team at Akamai was really, really pleased with the end result.
Brian, I've got a bunch of questions rolling in here. I'm going to try to lump a couple of them together. A few of them are obviously about the pandemic. And so, I think questions around how has it impacted your occupancy rates and how you thought this space would be used versus how it's currently used, what percentage or what portion of your current Cambridge workforce is working remotely, and do you see any strategies going forward in terms of making any adjustments or how you might deal with social distancing in the space in the future?
Well, first to explain what we're doing globally, we have about 60 offices, and we've only opened 4 of them. They're all in Asia, China, in Taipei, and we have a handful of essential workers, we call them. The work we do in the NOC is essential, and we have those NOCs in a few other cities around the world. But most of those people who would typically be in there in normal circumstances are working from home. We have just a skeleton crew that comes in. And then of course, some support services. Our global physical security team works out of this building, so they come in too. So it's very, very, very empty in this building and all of our buildings around the world. We've done quite a bit of planning for reopening. The 4 offices we have opened in Asia, it's been very successful. We've done what a lot of you are doing. We've created the alternating weeks, where if you're in Group A, you come in 1 week, the following week Group B comes in, and there's checkerboard seating for social distancing. We've implemented a global signage program. We've shipped out signage to all of the offices globally, and it's been installed. So it's branded and it's uniform. And we try to create policies. We've done a video for employees. We have online training for employees before they're able to go back to the office. One of the new things we've done, which we haven't implemented yet, but we will with the next office we open, employees will be required to take the training before they go in. Once they've passed the little test you take at the end of the training, a message goes into a database. It goes to our physical security team. And then what they do is they reactivate their access badge. So you won't even be able to use your access badge to get into an office until you've done the training. So, there's lots going on. Everyone's taking a different approach. Right now, all of our employees have been told they can all work from home through the end of June, next June, including the ones in Asia who come in. So whether Cambridge opens in February, April, or August, everyone still has that option currently to work from home through the end of June. And we're watching that. Our senior leadership's being very conservative in the planning. When the building does open, we're working very closely with Boston Properties. As I mentioned before, they're a very good landlord. They're being very forward thinking and getting involved with all the things we're all learning about air filtration and other best practices. They're helping implement them. We're getting involved, and we expect that we'll have a really good physical environment. Combined with our well building certification, it'll make the employees feel quite comfortable, we hope, by the time we do reopen.
Totally different topic, Brian, but here's an interesting one. I know you were only in the building for like 4 months, but have you had any company-wide competitions that include the Akamai in terms of wellness? I know we had joked about them as we were doing them.
Well, not competitions, and I'll tell you why. Part of the Akamai goes by areas where there's workstations. And when you have over 1,000 software engineers, to have people going by the workstations all the time would be annoying to some of them. Most of them are really cool about it. But we do have fairly regular, I think it's weekly or more, where we have groups organized by the HR wellness team to do walks. And they'll walk the Akamai from top to bottom, and sometimes from bottom to top. And it's extremely popular. They give out t-shirts. They use their Fitbit for tracking and do things like that. So it's very popular, very well used, but we are a little bit sensitive to the privacy of people who need to focus.
And Brian, again, in the context of you having only been in there for 4 months, what's been the employee reaction to working in the new space? What do people like most? Maybe stuff that's surprising to the project team, and yeah, I guess on the negative side, what do people like least, or are the things you would have done differently at this point?
That's a good question. Thanks for asking that. We went through a very detailed employee survey back in February, and we're just wrapping up focus groups in early March when we told everybody to work from home. So we really haven't had an opportunity to implement change and do things like that. But the survey was extremely popular. Employees are happy with the space. We do have a number of things we're working on, but nothing major. There would be no major difference if we could start over again with the feedback we have. But we've used this period of time to go in and make some of these little changes that will make people happier when they do eventually come back to the office. I can't think of anything major or noteworthy that I'd mention. It's really it says a lot of good things about the process we went through and the extensive employee engagement that was part of both the planning process and the change management process while the building was under construction.
I think that was the last question. So maybe with that, thanks for having us. Thanks for letting us give the tour. Christine, I guess we turn it back over to you.
Sure, thank you. First of all, Victor and Brian, bravo, amazing culture, space. I'm thankful to see this. As I told you before, I started at Officeworks after this project was completed. So now I have more, things to brag about. So bravo. And more importantly, guys, for CoreNet, please fill out the survey after this program. We'd like to get your feedback, and have a great rest of the week. And thank you again for participating.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.